The floor was still dark when I walked onto it, and I liked it that way. A battle simulation floor before the exercise starts is one of the quietest rooms in the Army. The big wall screen, the common operating picture that would soon hold a whole simulated war, was a flat gray rectangle throwing no light. The terminals along the tiers glowed with login prompts, small blue rectangles in the dimness like windows in a building at night. Somewhere a coffee machine finished its cycle and went silent. Cables ran in taped bundles along the floor, and the air had that particular smell of a room full of electronics and burnt coffee and the nerves of people who have not started yet. There were maybe 40 people in that space, and most of them did not yet know who anyone else was, which is the honest condition of most rooms if you are patient enough to notice. I had graded 400 officers on that floor. Not one of them had ever needed me to announce it. I found the senior controller station, the seat closest to the master screen, where the exercise control network fed everything that mattered. I set down my notebook, a plain green one, the kind the Army has issued for as long as anyone can remember. I clipped a headset over one ear and left the other free, the way you learn to when you have spent 20 years listening to two conversations at once, the radio in one ear and the room in the other. I did not take off my patrol cap right away. I wanted a minute to read the room before the room read me, and on a morning like that one, a plain colonel in a working uniform is close to invisible, which suited me. Invisible is a good place to learn from. You see people the way they are when they think no one important is watching, and the way people behave when they think no one important is watching is the truest thing you will ever learn about them. The training brigade staff came in loud. That is not a complaint. A staff that is about to be tested for 6 days straight, evaluated on every decision it makes while a simulated enemy tries to take it apart, has a right to its nerves, and nerves come out as noise. They filled the middle tier, unpacked laptops, taped acetate charts to the glass partitions, argued softly about who had the current friendly graphics and whether the overlay had been updated since the rehearsal of concept the night before. They moved like a team that had worked together for a while and mostly trusted each other, which is worth a great deal, and which I noted, because I note the good as carefully as I note the bad. An evaluator who only sees failure is not an evaluator. She is a person with a grievance and a clipboard. At the center of them was a major, and I knew before he said a word that the day was going to run through him whether he was ready for it or not. He was tall and squared away, the kind of officer who looks like the recruiting poster and has learned, over a career, to lean on it. His name, though I did not need it yet, was Trevor Lund. He was the operations officer, the S3, the man who would run the brigade's fight on the floor for 6 days, translate the commander's intent into orders and the orders into movement, and he was performing. Not for me, for his own people, and for the reputation of the unit, and for the version of himself he wanted the week to confirm. I have nothing against that man. I have been that man. Most of us have, on a morning when we were more afraid than we could say, and covered the fear with motion. He was moving fast and talking faster, pointing at the map, sending a captain off to fix a graphic, calling a time hack that no one had asked for. And when he turned and saw me sitting at the senior station, a woman he did not recognize in a uniform with nothing flashy on it, he made the calculation that busy men make when they are already carrying more than they can hold. He decided I was overhead, an observer, a contractor. Someone from the schoolhouse the exercise had let sit in because there was a chair and it would have been rude to say no. "They're letting anyone in today," he said. He said it loud enough for the tier behind him, and a couple of his captains smiled the way you smile at a boss's joke when you are new and hungry, and the boss is the person who writes your evaluation. He tipped his chin toward the back of the room, toward the folding chairs along the wall where distinguished visitors and observers sat. "Just be glad you're even here." I did not answer him. There is a discipline to not answering, and I had learned it a long time before, in harder rooms than that one. I clipped in my headset all the way, both ears now, and I opened my notebook to a clean page. I let the moment be exactly what he wanted it to be, because I knew it would not survive contact with the next 90 seconds, and I have never seen the profit in spending my breath on something the truth is about to handle for me. A great deal of the discipline of this work is simply knowing what you do not have to do. You do not have to defend yourself against a mistake that is about to correct itself. You only have to wait, and waiting is a skill, and I was good at it. The exercise control system came up at 06:45 on schedule because Wendell Pike ran it, and Wendell Pike had never in his life let a system come up late. The master screen woke from gray to blue, and the network began to populate. First the map, the whole simulated theater sliding into place. rivers and roads and the brown wrinkle of high ground. Then the friendly and enemy graphics, blue and red, the known and the guessed. Then, along the top margin where the exercise control roster lives, the assignments resolved one line at a time, the way they always do, cold and administrative and indifferent to anyone's morning. Officer conducting the exercise, senior mentor, exercise director. And then the line that runs the whole architecture of judgment for 6 days, the one that says who owns the assessment, whose call is final on what the training unit did and did not do, whose signature goes on the document that follows this brigade home. Senior Observer Controller and Chief Evaluator, my name posted at 0646. I did not look up at it. I did not have to. I felt the room change the way you feel weather change, a shift in pressure before anything visible moves, a heaviness that arrives in the body before the mind has words for it. The first person to read it all the way through was a master sergeant on the control tier, Colette Hargrove, who ran the floor non-commissioned officers and had worked with me twice before, once at a rotation in the desert and once during a staff exercise the previous winter. I watched her eyes go to the top of the screen, then come down and find me, then go back up, as if the screen might have changed its mind in the last half-second. It had not. She stood up at her console. Not to attention, nothing so theatrical. Just up. Fast, the way you stand when the ground you are on turns out to be different from the ground you thought you were on, when you realize the quiet person in the corner is the person the whole day belongs to. Major Lund was still talking. He had 10 more seconds of being right. He spent them on me. He was finishing his joke, some second half about visitors and coffee and staying out of the way, and one of his captains was no longer smiling, was in fact looking at the top of the screen with an expression that was trying to become a warning, and Lund followed the captain's eyes up to the master screen, to the top margin, to the line that said who was grading his exercise. I watched him read it. I watched him read it again. I have seen a great many men do that particular double read, and there is a specific stillness that comes after it. A stillness with no bottom to it, the stillness of a man recalculating not just the moment, but the whole morning, going back through everything he has said since he walked in, and finding at the center of it a sentence he cannot take back. 10 seconds after his name found mine on that screen, Major Lund stopped talking. He did not say anything for a while after that, and I did not make him. I turned to my notebook and wrote the time, 0646, and one word next to it, which was the word, begin, because as far as I was concerned, the exercise had already started. And the first thing I had learned about the man whose fight I was about to judge was how he treated a stranger he thought did not matter. That is not a small thing to learn about an operations officer on the morning of a war. It is, in fact, close to the whole thing, because an operations officer spends his day deciding which people and which problems matter enough to get his attention. And a man who guesses wrong about a colonel in a folding chair is a man who might guess wrong about a threat on a road, and the exercise existed to find out. I want to tell you what my job actually was, because the title on that screen makes it sound grander and colder than it is. I was the senior observer, controller, and trainer at a combat training center, and for that exercise, I was the chief evaluator. Strip the words down, and it comes to this. When a brigade goes to war on a simulated battlefield, someone has to stand outside the fight and tell the truth about it. Not to win, because I had no unit and no side. Not to embarrass, because embarrassment teaches nothing that lasts. To find, before real bullets are involved, the places where the plan and the reality do not touch, and to make the unit feel those places hard enough, in a room where no one dies, that they never feel them again in a place where people do. My job was not to win. My job was to tell the truth to people who did not want to hear it in time for it to matter. There is no theater in it, or there should not be. The good evaluators I learned from were the quietest people in the building. They did not correct you to be seen correcting you. They wrote things down in green notebooks. They asked you a question you could not answer and then waited, without cruelty and without rescue, while you discovered that the answer was not there, that you had never actually had it, that you had been carrying a hole where a plan should be. The whole craft is restraint. You are holding a great deal of authority, more than almost anyone realizes, because your assessment can shape a career and a unit's confidence, and, downstream, the way a battalion fights when it is real. and the entire art is in how little of that authority you spend. Spend too much, and you become the story. The moment the unit is talking about the evaluator instead of the fight, you have failed, no matter how right you were. That first quiet hour before the injects started landing and the floor turned into a controlled emergency, I walked the tiers. I read the ground truth feeds, the simulation's own honest record of where every unit actually was, which is different, always, from where any staff believes its units are. A staff sees its own graphics, the blue icons it has placed with care and hope. The ground truth sees what is actually on the ground in the model, the unit that is 2 kilometers from where its commander thinks it is, the fuel status that is worse than the report, the gap in the line that no one has noticed because everyone is looking at their own piece. I checked the enemy plan against the brigade's assumptions and saw, the way you see a crack in a wall you have looked at 1,000 times, the one place they had assumed away a problem instead of solving it. Wendell Pike ran the constructive simulation, the software army underneath the whole exercise, the thing that moved the red icons and calculated the outcomes and refused, always to be charmed. He had done it for longer than some of the captains on the floor had been alive, 20-some years of it. And he had the calm of a man who has watched a great many confident plans meet a great many indifferent facts. He caught me reading the ground truth and gave me a small, tired smile. "You always read the ground truth before the brief, Colonel," he said. "Nobody else does. They read their own graphics, and they believe them. You read what's actually there." "Their own graphics are a hope," I said. "The ground truth is a fact. I like to know the size of the gap between the two before they do. It tells me how hard the week is going to be for them, and how honest I'm going to have to be." "There's a gap this year," Pike said. He nodded at the map, at a place along a river where a road crossed. "Right there. They've got a passage of lines planned through that choke point, and I've been watching their rehearsal of concept. They walked it on the map last night. They did not rehearse the control of it." "There's always a gap," I said. "The question is whether they find it before I have to show it to them. What does your enemy plan do with that choke point?" Pike's smile got a little more tired. "What would you do with it?" "I'd wait until 2 of their battalions were tangled in it," I said, "and then I'd hit it." "Yes," Pike said. "That's what it does." I set my notebook on the ledge below the master screen. The subdued eagle on my chest, the only mark of my rank, the black embroidered spread of it, sat there flat and dark and unremarked, and that was correct. On that floor, my rank was not the point. The assessment was the point, and the assessment did not care what anyone thought of me, did not care about my rank, or Lund's joke, or the good reputation of the brigade. It was the one piece of authority in the building that could not be flattered or bullied or charmed, and I had spent a career learning to be worthy of standing next to it. Which is a different thing from wielding it. You do not wield the truth. You serve it. The evaluators who forget that turn into small tyrants, and everyone can smell it on them, and the training dies. I had learned the shape of it slowly, and mostly from my own failures. In my first year on the floor, a decade before, I had ended a lieutenant colonel's exercise with a line I was proud of at the time, a clean and devastating sentence about his inability to synchronize. And I had watched him nod and take it and go home smaller. And I had felt, for about a week, like a person who had done her job well. Then Ambrose asked me a question I have never forgotten. He asked me what the man had done differently the next time. I did not know, because there had been no next time I was part of, because I had not stayed, because ending him had been the whole of my ambition. Ambrose did not scold me. He just let the question sit until I understood that a grade that does not change what a person does next is not an assessment. It is only a verdict, and verdicts are for courts, and the floor is not a court. It is a forge. The entire difference between the two is whether you are still in the room when the metal is hot. I should tell you why I do this work the way I do it, because it is not natural to me to be the person who finds the gap. Left to my own temperament, I would rather encourage than correct. I like people. I want them to do well. The reason I grade the way I grade, the reason I refuse to look away from the hard thing, even when looking away would make everyone in the room like me more, has a name, and the name is Corporal Aaron Pruitt, and he was 21 years old. In the year 2011, I commanded a battery in Afghanistan. I was a captain then, younger than Lund was that morning, and I was proud in the way that gets people killed. which is to say I was proud of being fast. We were told to be fast. The whole rotation was built on tempo. Move quicker than the enemy can think, get inside his decision cycle, and you win. It is true as far as it goes, and it does not go nearly as far as the people who say it believe. Because there is a thing that looks exactly like speed, and is actually just haste. And the difference between them is rehearsal, and rehearsal is the first thing haste throws overboard. There was a movement we planned in a compressed window. A resupply and a repositioning that had to happen in the dark, along a route that crossed a wadi at a point where the high ground came in close on both sides. A danger area. I looked at it on a map at 2 a.m, by the light of a headlamp, tired in a way that had stopped feeling like tiredness and started feeling like a kind of weather I lived in. And I told myself it was fine. I told myself the danger area was a low probability. I told myself we would be through it before the enemy could set, that the tempo was the protection, that to stop and rehearse the actions we would take if we were hit in the wadi would cost 90 minutes we did not have, and would signal to my own soldiers and to myself a caution I did not want to be the kind of commander who signaled. I signed the plan. I remember the pen. It was a cheap government pen with the click worn loose. And I remember thinking, as I signed, that a good officer trusts her soldiers and moves. I have thought about that pen more than I have thought about almost anything else in my life. The enemy set. They set exactly where the map said they might, and the schedule said they would not, in the close ground above the wadi. And they let the first 2 vehicles pass and they hit the third. Corporal Aaron Pruitt was in the third vehicle. He was the kind of soldier who remembered everyone's birthday and gave away half his care packages and had a laugh you could find across a motor pool. He had a plan to open a garage with his cousin when he got home, a real plan, with a name for the garage and everything. He did not get home. And the difference between the world where he did and the world where he did not was a rehearsal. We skipped to save 90 minutes, a set of actions. On contact, we never walked through, so that when the contact came, the vehicles did the wrong things, in the wrong order in the dark, and by the time we had sorted it out, the cost was already paid. We were told to be fast. We were fast. Fast is not the same as ready, and Aaron Pruitt paid the difference. I do not tell that story on the floor. It is not a story for a brief, and it is not a story I would ever use to make an officer feel what I want him to feel, because that would be using a dead man as a tool, and he was not a tool, he was a person, and he is owed better than to be deployed in an argument. But it is under everything I write. It is the foundation the whole building of my judgment sits on. And on that first morning of the exercise, when I watched Major Lund's staff skip the rehearsal of the passage of lines to look decisive, to keep the tempo, to avoid the appearance of caution, I felt it come up in me like cold water rising in a well. They were compressing the very thing that had to be rehearsed. The passage of lines, the delicate and dangerous business of moving one unit through another unit's positions, is one of the hardest things a staff ever controls. Because for a window of time, 2 units are mixed together on the same ground with the same roads, and the seams between them are exactly where an enemy wants to be. You do not improvise it. You rehearse the control of it until every leader knows the sequence in his sleep, and they were treating that rehearsal as a formality they could not afford. A box to check if there was time. And there is never time. There is only whether you make it. I knew that shortcut. I had signed for it once. I had buried the receipt in a grave in a town I have visited every year since. I did not flinch. I have trained myself not to flinch, because a flinch from the evaluator tells the room something before the room has earned it, gives away the ending, turns the discovery they need to make for themselves into a thing they merely watched cross my face. I wrote it down, instead, in the plain green notebook, in the plain flat hand I use for the things that matter most. Passage of lines, rehearsal deferred, 0810. I put a small mark next to it, a mark I use for a gap that will not stay closed. A gap that is going to come back and ask to be paid, and I hoped, the way I always hope, the way I have hoped 400 times, that they would find it themselves before the simulation found it for them. They almost never do. That is why the simulation exists. The exercise found its rhythm, and the ground under the day began to shift, though the man at the center of it still could not read the shift. A little after 0900, the senior mentor arrived, a retired lieutenant general named Harold Ambrose, who had commanded more soldiers than most people will ever meet and wore it as lightly as a man can wear a thing like that. Senior mentors are a strange and useful institution. They have no formal authority on the floor. They command nothing. They are there to counsel, to see the things a serving officer might be too close or too invested to see. And the good ones are worth more than their weight in the stars they used to wear. Ambrose had taught me a decade before, when I was a major learning this craft and doing it badly. Too eager, too quick to correct, and he had never once made me feel small in the learning, which is the rarest generosity there is in a teacher. He came down the tier to my station and put out his hand, and he said my name, my rank, the whole plain fact of me, in a voice pitched for me and not for the room, because he had never in his life needed the room to hear him be important. "Colonel Vaughn," he said, "they gave you the hard one this year. Good. The easy ones don't teach anybody anything, least of all the evaluator." "Sir," I said, "it's good to have you behind me." "You don't need me behind you," he said. "You never did, not even when you thought you did. But I like the view from back here." He glanced up at the master screen, at the top margin, at my name, and then down at the middle tier, where Major Lund was bent over a map with his captains, moving pins, talking. And something crossed the old man's face that was not unkind. That was, in fact, a kind of recognition. "That one's fighting the room instead of the enemy," Ambrose said quietly. "For me alone." "You can always tell. He's spending more energy on how it looks than on how it is. You'll fix it or he won't get fixed, and either way it'll be honest, which is the only thing this place is for." He took the mentor's chair behind me, and I felt the floor recalibrate without a single word being spoken about rank or authority. That is the thing that people who chase authority never understand. The recalibration that lasts is the one nobody stages. Lund's joke had been a bit for the room, a small staged claim on who mattered, and it had lasted 90 seconds. Ambrose, sitting down quietly behind a colonel he respected, rearranged the whole floor's sense of gravity, and he did it without one soul being told to feel anything. The screen had named me at 0646. Now the fight would name me too, because the injects were coming, and an exercise is a machine for turning a staff's assumptions into consequences, patiently, one assumption at a time. The first serious inject landed at 0940. The simulated enemy did something the brigade had assumed they would not do, which is the only interesting thing an enemy ever does. They pushed a reconnaissance element hard toward the very choke point Pike had shown me, testing it, feeling for the seam, earlier than the brigade's plan expected any pressure there. The middle tier's calm cracked, just slightly, the way a windshield cracks from one point, and you can see, if you are watching, the lines that are going to spread from it. Reports started coming in a little too fast and a little too loud. And for the first time that morning, Major Lund looked back over his shoulder at my station, at the woman he had told to be glad she was even there, and he looked at me not with dismissal but with the beginning of a question, the first small crack in the performance. The first moment he wondered whether the person grading him might also be a person who knew something he needed. I did not answer the question. It was not time, and answering it would have robbed him of the work. But I marked the moment in the notebook, because the moment a proud officer first looks at the evaluator as a resource instead of an insult is the moment the training actually begins, and everything before it is just weather. The pressure turned inward after that, on both of us, in different directions, and I want to be honest about my direction as well as his, because the honest part of this story is not only about the major. On Lund, it turned the way pressure turns on a man who has decided, somewhere he cannot see, that the worst thing that can happen to him is to be caught being wrong. That is a fatal thing to decide, and most of us decide it at least once. Usually young, usually after some public failure, taught us that being wrong is dangerous. It is a lie, but it is a persuasive lie, and it had its hooks in him. The enemy's early push had exposed the seam at the choke point 2 hours before his plan said it would matter, and the honest move, the move a ready staff makes, was to slow down, pull his subordinate commanders together on the radio or in person, and rehearse the control of the passage of lines that his shop had deferred at 0810. Rehearsal would have cost him 40 minutes and a little pride. He had the 40 minutes. What he did not have was the pride to spare, or he believed he did not, which comes to exactly the same thing when the clock is running. His assistant operations officer was a captain named Reuben Alcott, young and sharp and not yet senior enough to have learned to keep a good objection to himself, which is a virtue disguised for a few years as a liability. I heard him try. He leaned in close to Lund, low, the way you do when you are about to tell your boss something he does not want to hear in front of the staff he is trying to impress. "Sir," Alcott said, "we didn't rehearse the passage." We map drilled it. We didn't rehearse the control. If they hit us at the choke point while we're moving through it, we're going to have 2 battalions tangled on the same road and no rehearsed plan to untangle them. We should take the time now. We don't have time, Lund said. The enemy's already probing. If we stop to rehearse, we hand them the tempo. We'll control it by radio when we get there. Push it. I wrote that down too. I wrote Alcott's objection and Lund's answer and the time, 09:51, in the flat hand, and I did not editorialize because the simulation was going to editorialize soon enough and it does not need my help and it does not miss. But I want to be honest about what happened inside me while I wrote, because it is the part of this work that no one warns you about and the part that separates an evaluator from a judge. I felt the pull to be merciful in the wrong way. I liked this brigade. They were a good unit having a hard morning, which describes most good units on most hard mornings. Their commander, a colonel named Dahlia Brenner, whom I had not yet met but had heard only good things about, had a fine reputation and had clearly built something real. A staff that trusted each other, a young captain brave enough to object to his boss. There was a version of the day in which I softened the assessment, not lied. I would never lie, just framed. Emphasized what they did well, of which there was plenty, treated the passage of lines as a near miss rather than a failure. Let a strong unit keep a strong grade, and let a proud major keep his morning, and let a good commander keep the confidence of her staff. Everyone would have thanked me. Ambrose, watching from the mentor's chair, would not have said a word against it, because he trusted my judgment enough to let me get it wrong. And a battery somewhere 3 or 4 years from now, commanded by someone I would never meet, would skip a rehearsal to save 90 minutes, because the lesson that should have cost this brigade a hard grade in a room where no one dies had been quietly filed down to spare a feeling. The lesson does not disappear when you soften it. It just gets mailed forward to a younger and more vulnerable address, and the postage is paid in a currency I have held in my hand at a field desk with a cheap pen. Mercy that hides the truth is not mercy. It is a bill you mail to a younger soldier. I keyed my mic to the control net and logged the gap exactly as it was. Passage of lines, control unrehearsed against a known and now active threat. Objection raised by staff at 09:51 and overruled by the operations officer. Decision recorded. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The control net is a quiet channel, and the record does not shout, it just refuses to look away. And I had decided a long time ago, in a town with a small grave in it, that I would rather be the person who refuses to look away than the person who is easy to thank. Those are usually different people. Now and then you get to be both, and it is a gift when it happens, but you do not get to choose it. And you must be willing to be only the first one, the hard one, on the days when that is what the truth requires. The decision I made next, I made without any spectacle at all, because the decisions that matter almost never come with a stage or a soundtrack. They come at a desk in a quiet minute, and no one sees you make them, and they turn out to have been the whole thing. There is a move available to a chief evaluator, and I have used it, where you end an officer's exercise in a single line. You write an assessment so damning, so clearly stated, that it travels up the chain ahead of him, and by the time he redeploys, the story of his week has already arrived and hardened into fact, and he spends the next several years being the major who failed the warfighter. It is sometimes the right thing. There are officers who need to hear, unambiguously, in language that leaves no room for comfort, that they are not ready for the responsibility they hold, that people will die if they do not change. I could have written that line about Trevor Lund. He had handed me the raw material for it before 0700 when he decided a stranger did not matter and said so out loud in front of his staff, and everything since had only added to the pile. I could end his exercise in one line. I had done it before. I decided to spend the harder currency instead, because the man had insulted me, and that, precisely that, was the reason I could not let the insult be the thing I graded. If I ended him, some part of it would be about the folding chairs and the joke about coffee, about the small hot wound to my pride. And I would know it even if no one else ever did. I would carry a suspicion about my own motive into an assessment that was supposed to be clean, and the assessment would be contaminated at the root by the worst and smallest motive a person in my chair can have, which is the desire to be proven important. The screen had already proven I was important, if importance was even the question, which it was not. I did not need Lund's failure to underline my name. I needed his failure to teach him, which is a slower and more expensive and less satisfying thing to want, and the wanting of it is the whole difference between an evaluator and a person with a grudge and a signature block. So I made the decision that cost the evaluator the most, which is to hold the standard completely and then stay in the room afterward to help the person meet it. I would grade the passage of lines exactly as hard as it deserved, no softer for how much I liked the unit, no harder for how the major had spoken to me. And then I would run the after-action review, not as an execution, but as a lesson. And I would write his name at the top of my notes, not as a defendant, but as a student. And I would spend my authority building him instead of burying him, which is the only use of authority I have ever fully respected. The only use of it that Aaron Pruitt would recognize as worth the price of his name being under my hand. I turned to a clean page and I wrote his name at the top, Major Trevor Lund, and under it I wrote the word teach, and I underlined it once. And then I turned back to the screen to watch the fight arrive at the exact place he had refused to rehearse, which it was always going to do, because the enemy in that model was patient, and the seam was real, and hope has never once closed a gap that discipline left open. The reckoning came the way reckonings come in that building, which is to say it came from the simulation, and not from me, and that is the entire point of the simulation, and the reason the army spends what it spends to keep the floor running. At 10:22, the enemy hit the passage of lines. Of course they did. The seam had been visible on the ground truth feed for 2 hours, and the constructive simulation does not know how to be tactful, does not care whose morning it ruins, does not weigh a talented major's reputation or a good unit's confidence in the balance. It simply calculates what a competent enemy would do to an unrehearsed passage of lines at a choke point, and then it does it. 2 of the brigade's battalions ended up exactly where Captain Alcott had said they would end up at 0951, tangled on the same road at the river crossing with no rehearsed plan to sort themselves out. And the radio control that Lund had promised would fix it in the moment turned into the thing that radio control always turns into when there is no rehearsal underneath it, which is a great deal of talking and very little movement while the clock runs and the enemy fires into a stationary knot of vehicles. The board filled with the small icons that represent simulated casualties, and I made myself look at every one of them, one at a time, because I never let myself grade a cost I am not willing to look at. And I have never once let the pretend nature of those icons make them small to me. Each one is a rehearsal for a real one. The simulation does not care who is embarrassed. That is why we use it. It will show a beloved unit and a talented major exactly what an unrehearsed step costs. And it will do it in a currency of pretend soldiers so that the lesson can be paid one time. In pretend, in a room with coffee and folding chairs, instead of in a garage that never got opened, over and over, for the rest of a cousin's life and a mother's life and the life of a captain who signed a plan with a worn-out pen. Lund fought it hard. I will give him that, and I did give him that, in writing, in the same flat hand, because it was true, and the true good is owed the same honesty as the true bad. He did not freeze. He did not blame his captains. He did not blame Alcott, whose objection he had overruled, which would have been the easy and the ugly thing. He worked the problem with everything he had, and everything he had was considerable, and it was not enough, because the thing that would have been enough was a rehearsal he had skipped 2 hours earlier to avoid looking indecisive in front of a room that happened to include a woman he had told to be glad she was even there. The whole chain of it was that human, and that small and that unforgiving. A joke, a fear, a deferred rehearsal, a seam, an enemy, a road full of stopped vehicles. That is how it always goes. It is never one large villain. It is always a series of small, understandable, human economies, each of which made sense at the time, adding up to a road you cannot get off of. When the exercise controllers called the administrative pause at 1100, the floor was quiet in the specific way a floor gets quiet, when everyone already knows the grade and is only waiting to hear whether the evaluator will say it kindly or cruelly, whether the next 20 minutes will be a lesson or a killing. I stood up. I took off the patrol cap finally and set it on the console. I walked to the front, to the space below the master screen where the after-action review happens, and for the first time all morning, every eye in that room came to me on purpose, including the eyes of the major who had decided at 0645 that I was overhead, and I could feel the room brace because they did not know yet which kind of person I was going to be, and they had reason, given how the morning started, to fear the worst. I did not make him wait for it. Making people wait, drawing out the moment before the verdict to inflate your own gravity, is a cruelty disguised as seriousness, and I have no use for it, and never have. Let's walk the timeline, I said. Not to find someone to blame. We are not doing that. We are going to find the minute the outcome was actually decided, because it is almost never the minute it becomes visible. The minute you see the casualties is the minute you pay. It is almost never the minute you bought. I put the timeline on the master screen. I walked it from the top, plainly, without heat, the way Ambrose had taught me to walk one a decade before. I showed them the enemy reconnaissance push at 0940. I showed them the seam at the choke point that had been on the ground truth feed since before their own brief, visible to anyone who read the model instead of their own hopes. And then I showed them the minute the outcome was actually decided, which was not 10:22 when the casualties appeared, but 0810 when the rehearsal of the passage of lines was deferred, and I put Captain Alcott's objection on the screen next to it at 0951, and I put the decision to overrule it next to that, with the times in the unit's own words as I had logged them, because the record was cleaner and harder and fairer than anything I could have said in my own voice. Lund stood very straight through all of it. To his credit, and I noted the credit, he did not look for an exit, did not glance at his commander to see how much trouble he was in, did not begin quietly assembling a defense on his face, the way weaker men do while you are still talking. He looked at the screen, and he took it. And I watched a proud man do the hardest thing a proud man ever does, which is to let a true thing about himself land in front of witnesses without putting up a hand to deflect it. That told me more good about him than the whole morning had told me bad. A man who can stand still inside a true accusation is a man who can be taught. A man who cannot is a man you can only remove. And then I did the part that the folding chair joke had almost cost him. The part I had decided on hours before when I wrote the word teach and underlined it once. The part that was the reason I had refused to let his insult buy him a cheap and satisfying ending. I want to be very clear about something, I said, and I said it to the whole room, but I was speaking to one man. I am not here to fail you, Major. Failing you would be easy. I could have done it before 0700 and had the morning off. And it would be cheap, and it would save exactly no one, because a failed major learns to fear evaluators, not to rehearse passages of lines. I am here so that the next 22-year-old riding in the third vehicle does not pay for a step we skipped to save 90 minutes. That is the only reason this floor exists. That is the only reason I exist in this chair. Not to catch you. To keep him. I let that sit for a second, and the room was very still, and I could feel that I had said the true thing, the thing under all my other things, without saying the name I keep. Then I asked him the question that teaches, the one I had been holding since 0810. Holding the way you hold a coal, careful not to drop it, and careful not to grip it. You had the 40 minutes to rehearse the control of that passage, I said. The enemy's early probe gave you the reason, and the plan gave you the window. Walk me through the decision not to. Not the justification. I have heard the justification. I logged it. Tempo, the enemy's already probing. We'll control it by radio. That is the justification. I am asking for the decision. Underneath the tempo. What were you actually protecting? He was quiet for a moment. I have asked that question, or one shaped like it, of a lot of officers, and the ones who are going to become good, answer it honestly, and the ones who are not reach for the justification a second time, dressed in different clothes. Trevor Lund looked at me, and then he looked past me at the folding chairs along the back wall, at the place he had pointed me toward that morning, and I watched him understand the whole shape of it, the joke and the fear and the deferred rehearsal all belonging to the same small protected thing. And he said it, out loud, in front of his commander and his captains and a retired lieutenant general. My reputation, he said, in front of the room. I didn't want to look cautious with the enemy already moving. I was protecting my reputation in front of the room. I know, I said, not cruelly, not with any triumph in it at all, because there was none in me. Just plainly one professional to another across a small, honest distance. I have done it too, more than once. It is the most expensive thing an operations officer can protect because you never pay for it yourself. You buy it with other people's road, now. Let's talk about how you rehearse the control of a passage of lines in 40 minutes when you are certain you don't have 40 minutes, because you will always be certain you don't have them for the rest of your career, and you will almost always be wrong. And we did. For the next hour I taught, and he learned, and the whole room learned with him, because that is the other secret of the after-action review, that when you teach one officer honestly in front of his peers, you are teaching all of them. and they learn better watching a colleague be built than they ever learn being lectured. I walk them through the abbreviated rehearsal, the way you strip a full rehearsal down to its irreducible core when the clock is real, the 4 or 5 control measures that actually matter at a passage of lines, the recognition signals, the sequence, the single leader who owns the untangling if it goes wrong, and the trigger that tells him to take it. I showed them how 40 minutes is enough if you know what to cut and what you must never cut. You cut the full terrain model and the walkthrough of every phase. You keep the recognition signals, near and far, the ones that keep the passing unit from being shot by the unit it is passing through. Because that is the failure that kills your own people fastest, and it is the one everyone assumes will just work. You keep the sequence of who moves when, said aloud by each leader in his own words. Because a plan a man has said aloud is a plan he owns, and a plan he has only heard is a plan he will improvise away the moment it is inconvenient. You keep the single question asked of every subordinate leader of what he does if the enemy hits him in the middle of the passage, and you keep it until every one of them can answer it without looking at a card. And you name, out loud, the one leader who owns the untangling if it goes wrong, and the trigger that tells him to take control. Because a passage of lines that comes apart with no one designated to fix it is just 2 units dying politely, each waiting for the other to move. And the thing that had started as an insult at 0645 turned into the best training that brigade got all week, which is the only revenge I have ever wanted from anyone, if it can be called revenge, which I do not believe it can, because revenge takes something and this gave something, and the two are opposites wearing each other's coats. The fallout moved through the room the way weather moves off after it has done its work, and the people it touched met it like professionals, which is the most you can ask of anyone, and more than you often get. Colonel Dahlia Brenner, the brigade commander, found me at the coffee station during the reset before the next phase. She was direct in the way that good commanders are, no defensiveness in her at all, no move to protect her officer from a grade he had earned, which told me more about why her unit was good than any assessment could have. That was a hard assessment, Brenner said. It was also a fair one, and it was a generous one, and those 3 things do not usually travel together. My operations officer walked in here this morning thinking he was the smartest man on the floor, and he is going to walk out a better officer than he walked in. And you did that without taking a single thing from him that he actually needed to keep. She paused and looked at me steadily. I heard how he talked to you at the start. The whole floor heard it. I want you to know that is not the unit, and it is not who I am building him to be. And I want you to know that I noticed what you did with it. You had every reason and every right to take him apart, and you built him instead. I will not forget that. He fought hard when it counted, I said. He didn't blame his captain, and Alcott gave him every opening. Put that in your own notes. It's true, and it matters, and he needs to hear the good from you as much as he needed the hard from me. You could have made him a story, Brenner said. The kind that follows a man for 10 years, the kind that gets told at bars. You made him a better officer instead. Thank you, Colonel. Lieutenant General Ambrose left in the early afternoon, his counsel given, his presence no longer needed, which is the senior mentor's whole art, to know the exact hour you have become furniture and to leave before you become it. He stopped at my station on his way out and looked at the master screen, at my name still sitting in the top margin where it had posted that morning at 0646, and then down at the tier where Lund was now teaching his own captains the very thing I had just taught him, passing it down already, which is the only proof that teaching ever takes. You know what the best salute I ever got was? Ambrose said. He was not really asking. It wasn't on a parade field. Nobody rendered it. It was a young officer I took apart in a tent in 1991. A lieutenant who wanted to quit for a week afterward, coming back to find me 20 years later, a colonel himself by then, to tell me that the chewing out kept his platoon alive in a place I have never been. That is the salute that counts. The one nobody sees, the one that arrives 20 years late from a direction you forgot you were owed anything from. He put his cap on and squared it. You'll get yours from that one down there in about 10 years, and you will not be in the room when it happens, and you may not even hear about it. That is how you will know it was real. The ones you are present for are half performance. The real ones happen behind your back in a briefing you are not attending. when a man teaches his own soldiers a thing you taught him and does not mention your name, because he no longer remembers it was yours. He just remembers that it was true. He left. Lund lingered near the door of the floor at the end of the day, after his staff had filed out with their laptops and their rolled-up charts, and I could see him deciding whether to come over, and not yet able to, which I understood better than he knew. Some apologies need to age a night before they can be said in a voice that means them, instead of a voice that is only trying to get out from under the weight. If he had come to me that evening, hot and ashamed, the apology would have been about relieving his own discomfort, and it would have put me in the position of comforting him, of saying it was fine, which it was not, and did not need to be forgivable. So I let him keep the night. I did not look over. I have needed exactly that mercy myself, the mercy of being allowed to wait until morning to say a true thing well, and I have not always been given it, and I remembered how much it had cost me on the occasions I was not. When the floor was empty, I sat with what the day had cost, because it always costs something. And the cost is the part of this work I keep to myself and do not put in any assessment. The screen was dark again by then, gray and flat the way it had been at 0600, my name no longer on it. The war folded back into software until the next morning would call it out again. I read the after-action review I had written, the whole timeline, the honest, ugly, clean shape of it, from 0810 to 1022, from a deferred rehearsal to a road full of stopped vehicles, and I let myself feel the thing that is always under it for me, the thing I do not let onto the floor because it is not the floor's to carry. I do this so that a colonel somewhere never has to write a letter I once wrote. I wrote that letter at a small field desk in 2011, by the same headlamp I had planned the movement under, to a family in a town I had never seen, about a young man who remembered everyone's birthday. I have never been able to remember exactly what I said in it. I have tried. I remember only that it took me 4 hours and that nothing I wrote was the right size for the hole it was trying to cover, and that I signed it with the same worn-out pen, and that I have not been able to look at a cheap government pen since without a small private turning in my chest. Every rehearsal I have ever made a staff run since then has been, in some way I would never say out loud, a sentence in that letter, revised, trying to come out different. It never comes out different for Aaron Pruitt. That draft is closed. It only comes out different for the ones who come after him, and the only way I have ever found to make it come out different for them is to sit in the hard chair and refuse to look away, and to refuse also to enjoy it. Because the day I enjoy it is the day I have quietly made it about me, about my rightness, about the folding chair and the joke, instead of about the soldier on the road. And on that day I will have become useless in the specific way that righteous people become useless. And I would rather retire than become that. Being right is not the same as being whole. I have been right a great many times. I was right that morning about the seam and the rehearsal and the cost, right in every particular. It did not heal one thing. Rightness does not heal. I carry both, the rightness and the grave, and I have long since stopped expecting the first to do anything for the second. They live in me together, side by side. And on good days, they make me careful, and careful is the most honest and most loving thing I know how to be with other people's soldiers. I turned off the screen that had named me that morning, though it was already dark, the small, pointless ritual of a switch under my hand, and I sat a while in the quiet with the cables and the empty chairs, and then I went home. And I did not sleep especially well, which is normal, and which I have stopped complaining about, because I decided a long time ago that some jobs are supposed to cost the person doing them a little sleep, and that this is one of them, and that the sleeplessness is not a flaw in the work, but a feature of doing it honestly. Reconciliation, when it came early the next morning, and it came the right way, which is to say, it did not come as a performance, and it did not ask anything of me. I was on the floor before the staff again, reading the ground truth for the next day's fight the way I always do, when I heard the door and turned, and it was Trevor Lund, alone, before any of his captains, holding 2 cups of coffee. He crossed the floor and set one down next to my green notebook, without being asked and without making a thing of it. And he stood there for a second with the other one, and I watched him choose his words, and the words he chose told me everything I needed to know about who he was going to become over the next 20 years. He did not say he was sorry for the folding chair joke, though I could see plainly that he was, that it had cost him a night. An apology for the joke would have made the morning about the joke, about him, about the small wound to my pride that I had already declined to nurse. And it would have put me back in the position of having to absolve him, which would have made me the audience for his contrition. One more room he was performing for. He was smarter than that now. One day smarter, which is the best rate any of us ever learns at. One honest day at a time. I was wrong about the room, he said. That was the apology, complete, 7 words, and it was more than enough. Because it was not about the joke, it was about the whole way of seeing that had produced the joke, the reflex of deciding who mattered and who did not by looking at a uniform and a chair. He was apologizing for the reflex, not the incident, which is the only apology that ever changes anything. Then he did the thing that mattered more than any apology, the thing I had been hoping for without letting myself expect it. Will you show me the part I got wrong about the fight? He said. Not the review, the fix, the passage of lines. Walk me through how you would have rehearsed the control of it in the 40 minutes. I have been up half the night with the manual and my own notes, and I can get it to about 30% on my own, and then I lose the thread. I can't see how you make the time, and I need to see it, because we do it again in 3 days, and I do not want to learn it from the simulation twice. I looked at him. I looked at the coffee he had set by my notebook, still steaming, and the master screen behind him just beginning to wake from gray to blue. And I thought about the word I had written and underlined the day before. Teach. And I felt the whole cost of the previous day turn over, just slightly, the way a heavy thing turns when you finally get the angle right into the day's reason. This was the reason, not the grade. This. A proud man, one day humbler, standing in an empty room before his staff arrived, asking to be taught the thing that had beaten him, so that his soldiers would not pay for it later. This is what the hard chair is for. This is the only thing it is for. Sit down, Major, I said. We have time now. And we did. We had the whole quiet hour before his staff arrived, the 2 of us at the master screen with the enemy still asleep in the model, and I taught him the part he had lost at 30%, the part where you decide what to cut, and I watched him get it. Watched the thing click into a place in him where it would stay. And somewhere in the middle of it, the thing between us that had started as an insult finished dissolving into work. Which is where the good things between soldiers almost always end up if you are patient enough to let them. He was not glad I was there anymore because someone had let me in the room. He was glad I was there because I knew something his soldiers needed, and I was willing to give it to him for free, at 0600 with a cup of coffee cooling beside me, which is the only welcome in a professional's whole life that is ever finally worth having, the welcome that has nothing to do with rank and everything to do with use. I never told him about Aaron Pruitt. Some sentences you keep, and that is one of mine, kept for reasons that are not shame and are closer to guardianship. But Aaron was in the room with us the whole hour, the way he is in the room with me every hour I teach. And I think in some way, Lund felt the weight under the lesson, the sense that this was not procedure, but something paid for. Because he took it the way a man takes a thing that has been bought at a price he cannot see and will never be handed the bill for. He took it carefully. He took it as if it were owed to someone. It was. Let me say one thing to you, whoever you are, because I think you might be somewhere I have been, and I think it might help to hear it from someone who found the other side. If you walk into a room you have earned, a room you have paid for with years, and the room decides who you are before you have said a single word, before you have shown one thing you are made of, let it. I know how hard that is. I know the particular heat of being written off by someone who has not done a tenth of what you have quietly done. And I know how badly the young and unhealed part of you wants to correct the record right then, out loud, in front of everyone, wants to make them see. Do not. Sit down. Open your notebook. The work will correct the record, and it will do it more completely and more permanently than your voice ever could, because a truth the room discovers on its own is a truth the room can never afterward unknow, and a truth you announce is only ever a claim they can choose to doubt. And when the screen turns to you, and it will, when you are finally the one holding the authority in the room, the one whose name is in the top margin, remember exactly what it felt like to be the person in the folding chair by the wall. Remember the heat of it. And then use the thing you hold to build someone instead of to bury them. Anyone can end a person who has wronged them. It is the easiest thing in the world. It costs nothing, and it saves no one, and it protects not one soldier on not one road. The harder thing, the thing that actually changes what happens to the young men and women who come after us, is to hold the standard all the way. No softer for love and no harder for insult. And then to stay in the room afterward with 2 cups of coffee if it comes to that, and help the person meet it. Let the work name you. And when it is your turn to name someone else, teach. That is the whole of it. That is what a small grave in a town I still visit every year taught me, and what a proud major taught himself in one hard night with 2 cups of coffee, and what I hope if you ever find yourself in the hard chair with someone's future under your hand, you will let it teach you too.